welcome to the Marley Bird YouTube channel, brought to you by Red Heart Yarns. This is a My First with Marley Bird video, so sit down, have some yarn and needles in front of you, and let's jump in. We are going to learn how to make the big comfy sweater today. This is a beautiful pattern that is free on the redheart.com website. That's right. All you need to do is click down there in the video description and you'll find a link to this pattern. While you're down there, go ahead and smash that like button, as my kids say, because I know you're going to enjoy this video. This sweater is a great first sweater project for the beginner knitter. You're going to learn how to do some ribbing, how to do some stockinette, and then how to do a really cool ridge, purl, and knit combination stitch. The front and back pieces of this sweater are identical, so you will make each piece exactly the same. Once both pieces are complete, you will seam them together and you will have a sweater that you will want to wear all fall and all winter long. Now, what do you need for this project? Take a look down here. I'm going to show you what you need. For this project, of course, you'll need the pattern, and it's free once again on redheart.com. You will also need some Red Heart Fashion Soft yarn. This is a DK weight yarn or a size 3 Craft Yarn Council yarn. And you'll also need a pair of size 8 knitting needles. Now, I'm showing you straight needles here, but to accommodate the number of stitches that you will eventually have on your needles, I'm going to suggest that you use circular needles when you're making your actual sweater. Don't worry, when you use circular needles, you use them just as straights. They just happen to give you more length on the actual cord that simulates the needle, and you will have extra space for your stitches so they don't be so squished up here. I'm showing you the straights though today because I will be using these to demonstrate the different stitches you will use for this sweater. Go ahead, download your pattern, and grab some scrap yarn and some needles, and I will show you how to work these stitches. Let's learn the stitches first before we cast on for our actual sweater. Once we've learned the stitches, I'm going to walk you through the pattern so that way you can get some little tips and tricks on how to keep track of where you are in the pattern. Then I'll show you how to seam up the pieces of the sweater and you'll be ready to go. We'll start off with a long tail cast on. We need to make sure we have a length of yarn that will accommodate the number of stitches you will be casting on. Since we're just going to do a few stitches, I'm just going to put a little bit of a tail here. I'll put the tail into my hand, take my working yarn, wrap it around my forefinger and my middle finger. When I come back up, I cross over. I turn my hand over. Now I go underneath the front loop and grab the back loop. Pull it off and give it a little tug, and you have a slip knot. You can tighten the slip knot just by pulling those tails apart. If you want more instructions on how to do a slip knot, there's a link to just a slip knot specific video in the description box below. Once you've completed your slip knot, go ahead and place it on your needle. You want your working yarn to the right of the needle and your tail to the left. Go ahead and take the tail and wrap it around your thumb like so. Once you've done that, take your needle and you're going to go up the thumb. Now you're going to take the working yarn, wrap it around your needle. Take your needle and you're going to thread it right directly through that same thumb stitch and then off. We'll do that again. Grab the tail and take your thumb and scoop it right around just like that. Go up the thumb, take the working yarn, go around your needle, take the needle, go out the thumb. So see that window? See this window right there? You're going to take your needle and swing right through the window and off the thumb. Let's do this again. You're going to grab your tail, scoop with your thumb, go up your thumb, take your working yarn around your finger or around your needle. Take your needle and go right through the window and off. When you go off, pull the tail and that snugs those stitches right up to the needle. Now this is an alternative way to doing a long tail cast on. There is another way of doing a long tail cast on where you don't have to let go of your needle to grab the working yarn. I'm going to show you how to do that now. Just like before, I'm going to grab my tail and I'm going to scoop it around my thumb, but this time I'm going to stick my pointer finger out just like so and take my working yarn and wrap it around my pointer finger. Once I wrap it around my pointer finger, I'm just going to bring it back and grip it so that way I have a hold. Now you can see I have a slingshot. Once I have this slingshot, I will go up my thumb just like before, But now I just scoop around down my finger, grab that yarn, come out my window that's created by my thumb just like before, and then off my thumb. Give it a pull, and I don't have to re-grip or anything. I just readjust, scoop my thumb around, and I'm back to my slingshot. I go up my thumb, down my finger, through the window, off my thumb. Re-grip, I'm back to my slingshot, up my thumb, down my finger, through my window, off my thumb. Back to my slingshot, up my thumb, down my finger, through the window, off my thumb. Back to my slingshot. You also want to make sure that your slingshot does not look like this. See how this has the yarn going outside of my thumb? I want it to go around this way. Does that make sense? So we want it to look like this, where the yarn is coming from the needle going to the outsides, just like that. We don't want it to be like this. See how this one is coming like more towards me and this one's to the outside? If you're doing it like that, you're not going to get stitches that are created correctly. So you want it to look like this. Let's count how many stitches I have. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'm going to put a multiple of 4, remember? So let's up, down, that, blop. There's 9, 10, 11, 12, and I need 2 extra stitches. So there's 1 and 2. Now I'm ready to work into these stitches as they're based onto my needle. So I'll place that needle directly into my left hand, grab my next needle, and I will begin to knit. To create a 2x2 rib, we're going to work in a combination of knits and purls. We will knit 2, purl 2, knit 2, purl 2, all the way down the row. The biggest thing when you do this is to make sure you move the yarn between your needles so that you don't accidentally get extra stitches. We'll go ahead, we will start off with knit 2, so we go into the stitch, yarn over, come out and off, and then we'll go ahead and knit the next stitch. Now I need to remember that I need to pull the yarn between my needles. So I go between my needles and I purl 2 stitches. I go in, around, out, off, in, around, out, off. Go between my needles, back to the back, in, around, out, off, in, around, out, off. Go between my needles, and I do all that before I do anything into these stitches, and now I purl my 2 stitches. Remember, when you knit, you have the yarn behind the needles, and when you purl, the yarn is in front of the needles. That's why it's important that you're moving the yarn between the needles, between each stitch as you complete them. If you want more instructions on just ribbing in general, there are more videos right here on the Marley Bird YouTube channel. See, you don't have to go anywhere else to find everything that you need right here. You find a link to all of the ribbing videos that you will need right down there in the video description, and you can get more instruction on ribbing. I've continued my ribbing and I'm just working it all the way down the row, and I will end with knit 2 stitches. If I've done everything correctly and moved my yarn between my stitches or between my needles before I completed a stitch, everything should look just like so. And you'll see here that I have 2 knits. There's 2 purls because I see the 2 purl bumps, 2 knits, 2 purls, 2 knits, 2 purls, 2 knits. Place the needle directly into your left hand and then repeat this action. What we will do now is we will knit our knits and purl our purls. So it's important that you learn how to recognize what a knit stitch looks like and what a purl stitch looks like. As I'm looking down here at these stitches, I can see these 2 purl bumps. You see those 2 purl bumps directly right underneath my needle? So I know those are purl stitches and I'm going to purl them. So my yarn is in front of my needle, go into the stitch, yarn over my needle, out and off, in, around, out, off. I can go between my needles and go to my next stitch. If I've done everything correctly, I already know that the next 2 stitches are knits, correct? Because I just did 2 purls. But I can confirm that by looking at them. I can see here that there are no purl bumps, that these look like V's. So we'll go ahead and knit those 2 stitches. See what I mean about knitting the knits and purling the purls? Go between my needles, and I see 2 purl bumps. See, there's a purl bump there and a purl bump there. So I will purl the next 2 stitches. I'm going to repeat this all the way down the row. Between my needles, I see a knit stitch and a knit stitch because there are no purl bumps, and I will knit them. This will also make it really obvious if you accidentally put 3 knits in a row or 3 purls in a row, and you'll have to work back, tink backwards to go and fix it. You'll be able to notice that immediately because you can read your stitches. You'll see here that I'm just cruising along, and it's just because I can see each stitch as it's presented. If it's a purl, I'm purling it. If it's a knit, I'm knitting it. Down to the end of my row. Finish the row. Go ahead, put my needle into my opposite hand, and I continue on. You can see here that the stitches are beginning to stack upon each other. So all of my knits with the nice V's are all stacked up. All of my purls with the bumps are stacking up, and I'm beginning to see some ribbing. Go ahead and work row 2 again, and then let's take a look at what the stitches look like on our needle. Remember, row 2 is just knitting your knits and purling your purls. I'm to the end of my next row, and you can see as I turn my work and I take a peek at it, my stitches are getting even more stacked upon each other because I've knit my knits and purled my purls. And you'll notice that as I turn my work and look at this side, my first row of stitches are purls, then knits, purls, knits, purls, knits, purls. But as I finished my work and I look at it this side, my first and last are knits. That's common and that's perfectly normal, and that's what we want. So make sure when you're working your ribbing, you work in this manner. You'll notice that as long as you knit your knits and purl your purls, all of your stitches will stack up on each other and you will get a really great ribbed look. Now, let's learn how to do some stockinette stitch. When you transition from a ribbing stitch to a stockinette stitch, you typically want to begin on a right side row. You'll notice in the instructions on the Big Comfy Sweater that the rib stitch pattern has row 1 indicated as a right side, which means you will want to end on a row 2 for the wrong side. Now, you could say, Marley, all I've been doing is repeating row 2 because row 2 was, knit your knits and purl your purls. What I mean by that is when you're starting on the stockinette portion of your sweater, as we're going to do now, I want to make sure that the first 2 stitches you're looking at are knits. They're not the first 2 purls. Does that make sense? That's where we are right here. Let's take a look. I will turn my work, and you can see here that the first column, the first 2 stitches I'm looking at are knits, which is great. I'm going to call that the right side of my ribbing. And so I'm ready to jump into my stockinette portion. And stockinette is really simple, you guys. It's just a row of knits followed by a row of purls. So let's see how we would do that. What's great is we have these really great lines going on, and the ribbing is starting to squish together if you're working on your actual sweater. But we're going to jump in and do some stockinette now. So for stockinette, we don't care what the stitches were before. We're simply going to knit this entire first row. So even right here, as I come to this stitch that was a purl and I was purling it, I will go ahead and knit it just as normal. So let's knit to the end of the row, all the way to the end. And you'll notice I did not slip the first stitch of the row because I don't feel like it's something that is absolutely vital, especially for your first sweater. I don't want you to have to overthink things and remember to slip the first stitch of every row. That might be something that you'll find later on in future patterns. A designer might tell you to slip the first stitch of every row to help with seaming. I don't want you to do that for this particular sweater because I don't want you to have to remember one more thing. I got to the end of my row, I turned my work, and I'm ready to purl back. Now here's another really cool thing is now that I've established my pattern, I've knit the first row, I'm looking at all purls. So if I wanted to say purl your purls, knit your knits, we could follow those instructions again because I'm looking at purls. So if I'm looking at purls, I want to go ahead and purl them. So I pop my needle in and I carry on, making sure that my yarn is held to the front of the needle. And you'll notice that I'm holding my yarn a little bit differently this time just because I know there are some of you out there that find purling this way to be easier. So I wanted to show you what that would look like. Then you could do the same motion, just holding it in the hand just like normal into my right hand. But then there's also those of you who like to purl with your left hand, where you hold the yarn in your left hand. And that's as easy as just adjusting. It's all the same motion. It's just wherever you hold your yarn. I'm scooping around just like normal. Now that I've completed this row, I have 2 rows of purls stacked upon each other. Turn my work and I'm back over here and I'm looking at knit stitches. I'm looking at the stitches that are directly underneath my needle and you can see they're all nice pretty V's. And I would go ahead and continue on knitting. It's the combination of the knit row and the purl row that give us the really beautiful stockinette. You'll hear some old-time knitters call that it's the sweater stitch. It's because it's what most sweaters typically look like, correct? With the nice pretty V stitches on the front and the bumps on the inside of the sweater. So stockinette stitch is really simple and it's something that hopefully you'll get better at as you work along on the actual sweater because you're going to be doing a lot of stockinette stitch. As you're making the sweater, you work the ribbing to the designated number of inches you need it to be, and then you change the stockinette stitch and you work that to the designated number of stitches, or then you work that to the designated number of inches you need that to be. Last but not least, you'll switch to one more stitch pattern, which is used on the shoulder, top of the yoke portion of the sweater. It's actually like from the armpits up. And it is not a difficult stitch pattern because it's still just knits and purls, but we adjust the rows in which we make them. Let me go ahead and work up a couple more rows in stockinette stitch so I can show you what it looks like. Then I want to show you how to cast on mid-sweater, so that way you can see how to cast on for sleeves. It's really easy and not as difficult as it might sound, and you're going to be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe how easy that is. That's what's so great about this particular pattern, is it really is super simple. Once you know how to cast on for the sleeves, we will jump into the next stitch pattern of this sweater, which is a ridge pattern. And that is done up on from the sleeve portion up to the top of the shoulder. Sometimes you will call that the upper body or the yoke of the sweater. So let's go ahead and take a look at the stockinette I've worked up. I just finished a wrong side row and let's take a look at what I have. You can see here the ribbing portion that we worked on at the beginning, and then I have this beautiful stockinette stitch, and we're looking at the right side of the fabric because we're looking at the knits. If I turn my work, you can see I also have the beautiful ribbing happening down here, but I'm also looking at the purl bump, so that's the wrong side of my fabric. As you're working on the sweater and you reach the designated number of inches for the stockinette portion before it's time to cast on for the sleeves, you want to make sure you have ended your work on the wrong side, meaning you've just completed the wrong side row and you're ready to start on the right side. And that is where I am in the pattern. So as you're working along in your sweater pattern, we're going to say this is where the pattern says to cast on the number of stitches you need for your sleeves. And it simply starts off as cast on X number of stitches. Well, you're looking at this and say, well, Marley, you taught me how to cast on with a tail and a working yarn, but all I have is this working yarn. So how do I cast on? Let me show you how to do the knitted cast on. All I'm going to do here is with this tail, I'm going to go into this first stitch just like I'm going to knit it. Yarn over my needle and pop out, only this time instead of letting this stitch jump off my left hand needle, I want to extend my right hand needle. Okay, do you see how I extended it? Take my left hand needle and I want to swivel around coming up from underneath the loop. So I'm swiveling and scooping and I'm placing that new loop directly on my left hand needle. Now I'll take my needle, go into the new stitch, just like I'm going to knit it. This is called the knitted cast on, and come out. Once again, I extend, swivel with my left hand, and coming from underneath, okay, I want to come from underneath. I'm going to scoop that stitch and place it back on my left hand needle. Go into the new stitch, go around your needle, pop it out, extend, swivel, and come from underneath and pop it back on. If you do not come from underneath and put that stitch on your needle, it's going to lay that stitch on there just a little bit awkward and you're not going to like it. So make sure you swivel and scoop from underneath. I am going to show you what I don't want you to do. So that way, if you're accidentally doing that, you can say, oh, that's what she doesn't want me to do, okay? So this is what I do not want you to do. So we're going to go in, we yarn over, we pop out. This is great. We extend. This is great. But you're like, oh, Marley, it's so simple. I just pop that just like that. I can just go right into that loop and put it on. Well, if I do that, see how that loop is it's diagonal and it doesn't really sit right. I don't want you to do that, okay? So I'm going to take that off. Let's take that whole thing off and redo it. So that's what I don't want you to do. So what I want you to do is go ahead and knit just like normal, extend, but instead of going to the top and going down, I want you to go underneath and scoop up. Put that stitch directly on my needle. Okay, so now you can see I've cast on 1, 2, 3, 4 stitches, all working into that last stitch I have. So now I have extra stitches here. So if this were a sleeve of this little tiny sweater, I could say, oh, I have sleeves there. Next part of the instructions say to go ahead and knit down the row. So let me do that. So I've cast on, and now I just go ahead and knit down. So I treat each one of those stitches just as if it was a cast on stitch. So I'm going to knit through those stitches, and then you'll see where you get over here to where your actual sweater stitches are going on. You just carry on knitting right down the row. Isn't that simple? Oh my gosh, how easy is that? It's one of the easiest ways to create sleeves. Just cast on stitches and work down. So when we get to the end of the row here, we have a couple options. We can go ahead and do something that's called the backwards E cast on. And it's actually a cast on I'm not very fond of, so I am not going to show you how to do that. I only mention it because those of you out there who do have some knitting instructors in your life, they might instruct you to go ahead and do the backwards E, and they are not incorrect in telling you to do so. It's just not my preferred method, because we can actually do this exact same cast on over on this side, and that's what we're going to do. So we're at the end of the row, but obviously we want our sweater to be symmetrical, so we want sleeves over here also. So we turn our work, and we will cast on stitches just like we did over here, but we'll do it on this side. It doesn't really matter that we're going to cast on knit stitches and we're looking at a purl side, because these stitches will actually be part of our selvage edge. They'll be what will be into the seaming section of the sweater. So I'm going to just go ahead and do my knitted cast on this edge as well. Just like before, extend, swivel, scoop. Okay? In, around, out, extend, swivel, scoop. Makes sense? Super easy, not real difficult, and once again, we're getting the stitches on here that we need to complete this side of our sleeves, correct? So now I have those on there. The next part of the instructions say to purl down the row, so that's what I will do. Simply go into the stitch as if to purl, and purl them all the way down the row. Not super difficult. Once you've purled these stitches all the way down the row, you're ready to move on. And the next part of the instructions for the sweater say it's time to do the ridge pattern. So let me get to the end of this row. We'll take a look at what we have, and then we will jump into the ridge pattern. I'm to the end of the row. I can go ahead and turn my work, and you can see, oh, it looks like I have a little tiny sweater started, doesn't it? With those little sleeves just hanging out there. And it's totally okay that this one side has one extra row than this side. It will never show up in your sweater once it's seamed up, so don't fret. I know there are those of you out there who are totally type A that are like, wait a minute. Don't worry, it's really okay. Everything's going to be good. Now it's time to jump into the ridge pattern. The The ridge pattern might seem a little bit intimidating because we put a name to some new stitches, but in reality, we're just doing knits and purls just like before. The first row of the ridge pattern is knit. The second row is purl. The third row is also purl, which means we will have a purl row on the right side of our work. So let's go ahead and jump in. As you're looking at your sweater or your little swatch, if you've worked along with me, you'll notice that we've worked our stitches for our actual cast on of the sleeves, and it's time to work the ridge pattern. The first part says we will knit the first row. Great, we're on the right side row, we're looking at knits. Really simple to just go ahead and knit this whole row. Even more simple is that the next row is purl, and we will be looking at purls, so we will purl the whole row. Just like normal, just like basic stockinette. It's row 3 when things start to change up a little bit. So let me get to row 3. I will knit down this whole row and purl the next row, and we'll get to row 3. I'm at the end of row 2 and I'm ready to start my row 3. So I turn my work, and what I normally have been doing when I'm doing stockinette is just knit this whole row. But for the ridge pattern, I want to purl my row 3. So I'm going to go ahead and purl row 3. So just like before, I will go into the stitch as if to purl and purl it. You'll notice here that I'm purling with the yarn held in my left hand this time, but the mechanics of the stitch are exactly the same. I'm still wrapping the needle around, or the yarn around the needle the exact same way. I'm putting the needle into the stitch the exact same way. I'm just holding the yarn in a different hand. I like to go ahead and show you many different ways to hold your yarn because there's no one right way to do it. You have an option to do any way that makes it comfortable for you. And I want to make sure that all of you out there are feeling as comfortable as possible. Once you get to the end of the row, yay, we have a great row of purls on our right side. We turn our work and it's time to knit on our wrong side because row 4 is a row of knits. So I will go ahead and I will knit this full row. Once again, I'm holding my yarn in my left hand. It's the same mechanics though of the knit stitch. I'm still in, around, out, off. I just am holding my yarn in my opposite hand. Once I complete row 4 of knits, I'm ready to repeat all of these instructions starting back at row 1. In row 1, I'm back to my knit row, and then I do a purl row, a knit row. So essentially, I am doing 2 rows of knits, 2 rows of purls to complete this ridge pattern. Because I've just done that, right? I did a knit row, a purl row, and then a purl row, a knit row. And it's time to repeat, so I will do a knit, then purl, purl, knit, knit, purl, purl, knit. And I will do that until the sweater measures the designated number of inches in the pattern. Once you've reached that, it's time to bind off. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to work a couple more repeats of the ridge pattern and show you how to bind off, so that way you bind off really nice and clean. I've worked a couple more repeats of the ridge pattern, and I want you to take a look down here. You can see down here that the ridge pattern really puts these really great purl bumps on the right side of the fabric, and that's really wonderful, okay? But to make sure that for seaming purposes, I have stitches that are really easy to work into, I want to have a nice row of knit stitches when I bind off. So what I did is I finished off my work after a row 2. So I am ready to start a row 3 where I would be doing a purl row, but I'm actually going to bind off knitwise. And the reason I'm doing that once again is because when I bind off knitwise, I will have some nice knit stitches up here to do the mattress stitch. And I find that easier to work with. So this is where I'm going to say it's a little bit more important that you finish off after a row 2 versus the designated number of inches you need to reach. So if you're trying to pick one or the other, choose on the side of finishing after finish a row 2 and beginning a row 3. But instead of starting row 3, we're going to bind off. Okay, so that's where I am right here, and I'm ready to bind off these stitches. And I want them to be bound off not really tight, but I also don't want a really loose lace type bind off. So I'm going to be really conscientious as I'm binding this off that I'm not over tightening my stitches. It's really as simple as knitting 2 stitches to start off. So knit 1, knit 2. So I have 2 stitches on my right hand needle. I will take my left hand needle, go into the first stitch I worked, and have it leapfrog up and over that second stitch. Okay, now here's where people can start to get these stitches really tight, is they'll take the time for this stitch now and really make it tightened up to tighten that one. And we don't want to do that. We want to make sure that that stitch is still able to move on the needle relatively easily. Knit your next stitch. So I have 2 stitches on my right hand needle. Use my left hand needle, grab the back stitch, leapfrog up and over the front stitch. Knit 1 more stitch. We always want to get 2 stitches on our right hand needle. Go into the back stitch, leapfrog up and over the front stitch. Knit 1 more stitch, back stitch, up and over the front stitch. Knit 1 more stitch, back stitch, up and over the front stitch. I'm making sure these aren't super tight. I want to make sure that they aren't like cinching in on each other. And I can see here, like they look really, really nice and clean. Nothing's getting too out of whack. And I go ahead and I continue this down the row, binding off each stitch to the very last stitch. To the last stitch here, I go ahead and knit it. Back stitch jumps over the front stitch just like before. I will grab a nice pair of scissors here, and I will leave myself a nice long tail. Once you've cut your tail, go ahead, take your needle, and you're literally just going to extend that stitch all the way out. Give it a gentle tug, and your stitches are bound off. Can I make a suggestion? When you cut your tail, make sure you leave a tail that is at least 3 times the length of the shoulder you just created, okay? The reason I want you to do that is because now we can use that tail to seam up our shoulder. If you leave your tail long on the front and your tail long on the back, you now have 2 tails that are already attached to either side of your sweater to seam up your shoulders towards your neckline. It's just one extra thing. You won't have to weave in ends at the end because you have these tails already attached and you don't have to add extra yarn. Once you've learned all of these stitches and completed that side of your sweater, you're actually ready to start the other side of the sweater, which is completed identically to this side. So you will cast on the same number of stitches, work the same number of ribbed rows, work the same number of stockinette, same number of cast on stitches for your sleeve, same number of the ridge pattern, and then bind off the same number of stitches. Really easy. So you're going to do this in tandem. Make 2 of these. Really easy. Now, I know that there are many of you who don't really know how to look at the pattern and which number pertains to which size I'm making. So I want to take that time right now to show you how to follow along in the actual pattern. Then I will pull out a sample that I've already had made up of the front and the back and show you how to start off seaming your work. So let's take a look at the pattern first. I have the printed portion of the pattern right here in front of me, so let's take a look at it. The first thing you might notice when you're looking at this pattern is that there are a lot of numbers going on here. And which numbers do you need to pay attention to? Well, right up here at the top, it says the directions for the size small, and then it changes for medium, large, 1X, 2X, and 3X in parentheses. Meaning this number out here, this size 44, is for a size small, which means this garment is meant to be oversized, hence the name Big Comfy Sweater. That 44 is the small. The first number inside the parenthesis is the medium. The following number is the large. So on and so forth. It would go 1X, 2X, 3X. So I want you right now to highlight the number of the size you're going to make. So I highlighted the smallest size. So I highlighted 44. And that lets me know that every time I see a series of numbers where it's one number and then all the others are in parentheses, I am going to pay attention to the one number outside of the parentheses, whereas you might be paying attention to the third number within the parenthesis. But now you don't have to go back and think about that every time because you've highlighted that number, right? So what I will do now is I will come over here to the finished length. I will also highlight that number. And then as I come down here to the pattern, I'm going to find every instance where there is a number followed by parentheses, and I will highlight the number that pertains to me. Remember, I'm doing the one outside the parenthesis. You might have one of these within here. And I keep following along, and I will highlight that number for me. Follow along, and you'll see right here, cast on for sleeves, it says cast on 34, and that's for all sizes because there aren't a series of numbers after that that shows, oh, I did 34 for this size and then 36 for another size. That's not how it works. It's 34 for all sizes. But then you see down here that it has a series of numbers, and it tells you how many number of stitches you have after you cast on 34. So I'm going to highlight the number 128 because right here we can see I had 94 stitches. I cast on 34, I'll end up with 128. Then after the next row of casting on 34 stitches, I will end up with 162, whereas you might have one of these other numbers. Then it says we're going to work in the ridge pattern until the piece measures whatever number pertains to you from cast on rows. 10 inches is what this says. Well, obviously we have worked further than 10 inches from our initial cast on rows. This cast on rows right here is talking about the cast on rows for the sleeve, okay? So you will work the ridge pattern for the designated number of inches from the cast on rows of the sleeves. All right, once you've done that, you'll bind off. Then it says for the front, work the same as the back. Great, you've already done all the work that you need to do as far as highlighting the number of stitches you need to highlight. Now here's a little suggestion, okay? When I'm working in patterns that indicate I need to work for a certain number of inches rather than a certain number of rows, I will keep a separate piece of paper and I will put a tally mark every time I finish a row. So that way, if I have to make a front and a back that are identical, I can say, okay, I know I did exactly 80 rows on the front or on the back. I need to do exactly 80 rows on the front to make sure that they are exactly the same. You don't have to do that. It's just one of those things that if you really want to make sure the front and the back are identical and do something different than following along just with measurements, that's a way to do it. And it's just a little tally mark. Do a little tally mark, maybe do it in groups of 5 or 10. And then after you complete one side, when you go to the other side, you can do the same thing and you'll have the exact same number of stitches. Really simple, right? It's logical, but it's one of those things you might not think about the first time you've made a sweater. Once you've made the front and the back of your sweater, it's time for the finishing. And you'll see here in the pattern, it says, leaving the side edges in ribbing unsewn for the side slits. So we will not sew up the side slits. We were gonna leave the side edging just the same, just leave it real same and simple. Says sew the side seams and then sew the shoulder or the top and the top of the arm seams, leaving about, there's a number there, so I want to make sure I highlight the number that pertains to me. So for me, it would be 7 inches open at the center for the neck. Says neckline will shape naturally with gravity, so the underarms and sleeve seams weave in the ends. This is going to be so simple, you guys. The biggest thing here is that we're going to seam up the sides, seam up the shoulders, and then seam up the underarms. Pretty basic. We're going to leave an opening right here at our neck so that way our head can fit through. And then with the stitch pattern that is used up here at the yoke, that ridge pattern, the neckline of the sweater is actually going to naturally drape and give a really great, beautiful look just because of the way gravity is. So it's really easy. Once you've completed the front, once you've completed the back, it's time to seam it together. Now I've already completed a front and a back, so I'm going to show you how to seam up the sides and I'm going to show you how to seam up the shoulders, and then you're on your merry way. You can complete this sweater. So let's do that now. Looky here, I have a front and a back. The first thing I want you to do is I want you to match up the front and the back with the wrong sides facing each other. Now the best way to know what is the wrong side is take a look at your stockinette stitch fabric. You want the purl sides to be next to each other. So as you look down here, you can see I'm taking the edge of my ribbing and partnering up with the front to the back, and I have my purl edge here, my purl side here of my stockinette, and I'm just making sure they're right next to each other. And I'm going to place all that out. The sweater is all even. Look at that. See? Do you see that right there? So I have it side by side, right next to each other. Wrong sides are together. The reason I want wrong sides together is because the right side is how we will do the mattress stitch. So I am pulling my work over and I'm going to start over just on the side seam right down at the bottom of the ribbing. Let's take a look. You can see down here, this is my ribbing portion, and remember the instructions stated that we were not supposed to seam up this part of the ribbing. We're going to leave that nice and open. But that means that we have to join our yarn right past the ribbing bit. So I am using a different colored yarn to seam up just because I want you to be able to see what I'm doing, but you will use the same color yarn that you used for your actual sweater. I'm taking a length of yarn that I know would travel the entire length of the side of the sweater. So make sure you do that. Cut a length of yarn that is long enough to get up to the armpit. I'm not making a slip knot. I'm going to thread this yarn directly onto a steel bent tip tapestry needle. I highly recommend you using a steel bent tip tapestry needle for this portion because it will make it easier to seam stitches. We have to join this yarn here at the beginning with the figure 8. So I'm going to come down here and I'm looking right here at the edge, and I will be working up along the edge of these stitches. And I'm going to just pop my needle right through that edge and pull it up, making sure I have a little tail left over. Come over to the corresponding side to the same type of stitch going up that edge, and then come back over to where we came in before, and I will go up again. So I've created a figure 8. See the figure 8? And then give that a nice tug. Now working up along the edge of the front and the back, and you'll notice it naturally wants to curl. That's what Stockinette does. So you'll have to get your hand in there and unroll it. But working up along these stitches, so right next to these V's, what I'm going to do is I will go in to this stitch. So I'm going into the stitch, popping up and coming out the next one. Can you see I have 2 bars on my needle? That's what I want. So I'm going to pull this up just like so. This is called the mattress stitch. Come over here to this side and going in exactly where the yarn came out. That's why I wanted you to see it in a different color. I'm going to go in exactly where it came out and then come up where I get 2 bars and then pull it up. Come back to the opposite side, making sure you're unrolling your stockinette so it doesn't give you the wrong row to work into. Go in where you came out, go up 2 stitches, so you have 2 bars, 2 bars, and pull up. And you will do this working back and forth on the front and the back until you get to the armpit section. So I'm back over here, going in where I came out, going up 2 stitches, and coming out. So I have 2 bars. You see that? And pulling up. And you'll notice I haven't pulled these really tight yet because I want to show you what it's going to look like when I pull this nice and snug. Going in where I came out, going up 2 stitches, and pulling. Once I work this up several inches, I can go ahead and begin to start tugging these close. So what I'm doing is I'm grabbing the tail that I originally joined, and I have my working yarn, and I'm just going to pull it so that it brings those pieces together. And you can see I've joined the front to the back, and it looks virtually seamless. Look at that. You can't even see the gray yarn I was using. And I would continue on. I have the yarn, it came out over here. So I'd come back over here, see where it came out. Go in and travel up. So I have 2 bars and come out. Come over to this side. Make sure you unroll. Always make sure you unroll. And I'm working right along the edge, going into the same stitch I came out. Go up 2 stitches and pop out. All the way up. This makes a really great invisible join, and it's the perfect join for a sweater in my opinion. What happens here is once you've joined these 2 pieces together, on the inside of the sweater, you get this really nice bump. This is the edge of our sweater. This is our selvage edge that is actually on the inside. And when our sweater is complete, we can take this tail, thread it onto a tapestry needle, and just weave it through this selvage edge to weave in our ends. Pretty simple, right? Now, if you're doing that all the way up to the top here, all the way to the top, to the edge where the sleeve is, you can actually continue on and just seam these together as well using a whip stitch, or continue on using a mattress stitch. And so it is totally up to you. What's really great is this right here. is going to be invisible because it's in your armpit. So you can decide to do whichever one you want. This here is a lot more visible because it's the side of your body. It's going to be a lot more visible. But this here, your arm is down a majority of the time, unless you're raising your hand because you're sure, and it's going to be rather invisible. So if you wanted to do a whip stitch there, you totally could do that. Now, at the top of our sweater, when we're looking at the shoulder, that's going to be visible again as well, correct? So up here at the top, remember when I mentioned that you should leave a tail that's long enough to seam this together? Obviously, I did not do that the first time around. So make sure you heed my warning so that way you don't have to reattach yarn, but you would reattach yarn at this point just like you did before. So you would grab your yarn in a matching color, make sure it's a matching color. Once again, I'm going to use the gray yarn just because I think it's really easy to see. And you would do a figure 8. And I'm coming right here at the very edge, and I'm just going to go in, leaving a little tail, come to the opposite side, leave a little, come back over here, and come up, and I've done a nice figure 8, and I've joined the seam together. Now at the top here, we aren't joining row to row, we're joining stitch to stitch. So we have to do the mattress stitch a little bit differently. What I'm going to do is come over here and I'm going to work directly around that V of a stitch right there and pull my yarn. Come over here to the opposite side to the corresponding stitch on the opposite side of the sweater and pull up the V and pull. Come over here to this side, go in around the stitch, right? I'm going around the V, you see that? And I'm pulling. Coming back over here, going around the V stitch right there, you see that? And I'm pulling. As I do that, you can see that I'm recreating a V stitch. And as I pull the tails together, or pull the tails apart, just like that, it brings the two pieces together and it makes it look seamless. So because we're doing stitch for stitch, we have to go around the actual stitch here, pull up a V. On that side, come over here, I'm still going in where I came out and pulling up the next stitch. Come over here, go in where I came out, and pull up the next stitch. Go around the next stitch. Maybe that's a better way to say it. And when I give it a tug, it pulls the two pieces together. I do get that nice seam on the inside right here, so I can take all of my tails and weave them into that seam. Now I will seam this together. Remember my size, it said to do it for 7 inches. And one thing you could do is you could take a stitch marker and measure this out for 7 inches and then take a stitch marker and pin it there so that way you don't accidentally stitch further than you need to. And then once you're to the point you need to finish off, weave in your ends, you have your neck opening, and it's done. You've completed the big comfy sweater. See what I mean? Once you weave in your ends and you leave your neck opening, you have space to wear the piece, and then as it's worn, gravity takes its shape and it gets a really beautiful kind of drapey boat neck piece, and it's just big and comfortable. You can't go wrong with this wonderful sweater. I love the slits up the side. I think that's really forgiving. It's just gonna be really pretty. I love this so much. I hope you love this so much too, and you're gonna run out and grab some Red Heart Fashion Soft yarn and a pair of size 9 needles and make yourself your very own big comfy sweater. Thank you to Lorna Miser, who is the wonderful designer of this sweater, and thank you to redheart.com, who has put it up for free, and it's available for all of you. I hope you enjoyed this My First with Marley Bird, and you'll come back here for more. All you have to do is hit subscribe and you'll know immediately when I post a new video up on YouTube. I'm Marley Bird, proud spokesperson for Red Heart Yarns, and this is a My First with Marley Bird video. Make sure you smash that like button, and I'll catch y'all later. Bye. Looking for more Marley Bird? Don't worry, I've got you covered. Click right down there and you will find more videos just like this teaching you how to knit or crochet, all brought to you by Red Heart Yarns. Go ahead, click away. Don't be shy. Don't forget to smash that like button.